This is Double Helix. I'm Janice McCoy. This is Jung-Ah Kim, and we are reviewing My Real Children by Joe Walton.
Right, so to give a brief summary, this is a work of speculative fiction that imagines a woman can look back on her life and remember the distinct realities, two paths that happen. They branch off at this certain one event from two different answers to the same question that she gets as a very young woman. So,
did it work for us?
Not really.
No.
It's a little difficult to give a negative review. I think one of the things we want to do, though, is explain why it didn't work for us. So there are some points that we're going to go through now.
And first off, the characters. A lot of them were very flat and not especially believable. And in particular, we both agree, the main character, whose name is Patricia Cowan, her husband Mark is, he's just kind of every sort of bad husband you can imagine, short of physically abusive, all rolled into one, even when that doesn't make sense.
Yes, I think there were many characteristics attributed to this guy. Unfortunately, some of them are actually in conflict with each other. And we think that part of it might have been just to drive the drama along in the story, to highlight one of the realities as being the harsher, grimmer reality. And that's why the story takes all these negative characteristics and rolls them into this one character mark. But that ends up with the result that basically you can't seem to make sense of the character at all. And he's unfortunately one of the main characters. So it makes this sympathizing with the story rather difficult.
Yes, it's hard to believe in how awful his marriage was, because in order for it to be as awful as it was, he had to have a lot of point of views that didn't seem to mesh at all.
Right. Yeah. And so we had that problem. The other problem was with the actual split event. The idea seems to be taken from quantum physics, where, we've seen this kind of scenario in fiction before. Sliding doors would be the best example of something that a lot of people know about, how you can have these alternate realities. And I think some of the problems we have is that in this context, the story takes it even further. There's alternative realities, but not only are they just driven by this singular event in one person's life, because it seems that before that, everything is the same.
Singular. Yep.
Yeah. But also, it turns out that this individual, Patricia, has somehow changed the course of the world's events. I think that's something that we have even more of a problem with.
Yeah, and it takes this idea that, a butterfly flapping its wings in Japan can cause a typhoon in the U.S. or vice versa.
Something
I've forgotten
like
how
that
works exactly. And it makes Patricia's actions in each timeline the butterfly that completely changes everything. And it's one thing for a butterfly to change wind currents and to help, presumably, shift one way or the other. It's another to say one anti-war activist prevents nuclear war.
Yes.
One anti-war activist, mind you.
I think the problem we have is that, it doesn't reflect any sort of cumulative effect. In fact, actually, I was just rereading the ending now. It seems like the heroine, Patricia herself, doesn't quite understand how that could be so different.
Right.
We would like to know too.
And the book doesn't give you any inkling. I could maybe imagine some kind of story where in one timeline she's saves a scientist's life or a politician's life,
right,
or doesn't, and then maybe some other things too that could contribute, and you could see all of them working together. But we don't have any hint as to what her actions might have been.
No, we don't.
To change things so radically.
Right. And then the other thing that irritated us along the same way, speaking of the famous scientists who said, or the famous
Yes,
politicians,
right.
there was some moments in the book, in one of the realities, that the character meets famous people, and lots of famous people, and it seems, this is just a matter of course.
Yeah. I call it the Forrest Gump syndrome. I've seen this pop up in some other areas in fiction and TV, where you're back in the past and somehow this minor character happens to meet everyone who's important and famous. And that just doesn't seem... I mean, how many of us have significant encounters with people who end up being really famous?
That's true. And then, having said that, this person does somehow change the world.
Right, and she also changed the world. So,
so yes, we struggled with that aspect too.
That was a problem. Now, I have to say, the name dropping stops partway through. It doesn't continue throughout. It happens early on.
Right. But it's enough that it irritates you.
I was irritated.
I found it very strange.
Sort of distracting. Also, sticking with, again, the science still on this decision point, I didn't even think about this, but you were pointing out how annoying it is that the one most important decision that changes the world and her life radically is her decision as to whether or not to marry.
Yeah, I don't think we're giving this away. This is like in the first couple of chapters.
Yeah, I think it's important enough to know that, and there's no other decision that's treated the same way.
No.
There's nothing else as important as whether she got married.
I appreciate the fact that this has some historical context. It was, the heroine's character starts out, as a young woman in the early 50s, 40s. And I understand that at that point in time, marriage was a life-changing event.
It still
for
can
a lot of
be
women.
a life-changing event, but it's not the only most important.
Yes. But the fact that this was the point...
changing.
Exactly. The fact that this was the point chosen to dictate the humanities course of events is a little much.
Yeah, it was hard to take.
Yes.
And then once the timeline split, one is so ridiculously grim. Again, short of abuse, we're not. It doesn't go into physical abuse, but I would say emotional abuse.
Yes,
certainly emotional
definitely.
abuse. So if you're not into seeing marriages with emotional abuse, stay away from this. And then the other one is just the opposite. It's like Joe Walton's dream life that she's created for her character.
Yes, and I we were talking about this earlier, and I think that it's a certain type of idealistic world that perhaps the writer would have liked.
Yes.
I think you put in
projection.
What's the right word for it? You put in a good phrase.
I've heard people talk about Mary Jane, the Mary Jane syndrome, where the one of the characters is just a stand-in for the author, and then all the wish fulfillment gets projected onto Mary Jane.
Yeah. Without going into a lot of detail, I think a lot of that was reflected in this other reality, and I thought it was a little too harmonious. Possibly a little, maybe tongue-in-cheek. I'm not sure if it was even intentional, because I found it just almost breathtaking.
Breathtakingly bad, you mean?
It was breathtakingly... Everything was going so well, apart from, the little fallout. But
right. So,
I don't think it's a little too much.
Yeah.
I find that, it was entertaining to read because it was just too good to be true.
It did seem too good to be true. I have to agree. Yeah. So, and all because she got married or not, and it's putting a lot of weight on the institution of marriage.
It is.
So, is there anything else we want to say, or does that kind of sum up our...
Yeah, I think so. I think we can give our conclusion here.
Yeah, we were not big fans. I know Joe Walton has a lot of fans. She's an award-winning author. Joe Walton fans might enjoy this, because certainly some of her more popular works I have not enjoyed in the past. So,
this was my first.
Was your first one?
Yes.
All of her books are very, very different. She goes off in very different directions, which I find completely admirable and amazing. But this was not a direction that I enjoyed at all.
Right. And as somebody who read her books for the first time, I found it a little underwhelming. So, yeah. So I guess our conclusion is, if there are certain elements of what we've told you so far that attract you, by all means, go out and read it.
And if you're a diehard Joel Walton fan, well, let's face it, you've probably already read this book.
Exactly. So, but that's our conclusion.
That is our conclusion.